These top two riders challenging for the Jayco AlUla Stagaire contract, Jack Ward and Zac Marriage, marked each other out of the race so heavily they were actually pulled off the circuit. How does that happen? Let's take a look. Welcome back to the Homegrown Advantage, where we analyse domestic racing here in Australia. Today, we're looking at the men's Harbour City GP, 3 stages. It's the 4th round of the ProVelo Super League. Wasn't the most selective of races, but the final stage circuit proved to be really challenging, and we saw those 2 top favourites for the World Tour Stagaire contract actually pulled out of the race. We'll take a look at how that happened in a moment, but first off, let's dive into stage 1. So we started off with a criterium around the Sydney Motorsport Park. It's 2.8 kilometres. It's got a bit of an uphill drag past the start-finish line, and then there's a quick downhill section around the back. There was a light headwind up the climb. That neutralised a few attacks, made a bunch sprint a bit more likely, but it didn't stop Tynan Shannon and Sam Bush from going on the attack. Shannon's super strong in the breakaway. The bunch knows this. They didn't give him too much leeway to work with. And so Cage Body Wrap, they managed all of the attacks for the rest of the race, setting this one up before they got to the first intermediate sprint. This race, it's 2 crits and a Kermesse, which is like a big crit. They were almost certainly going to come down to those bonus seconds to settle the GC. And so we ended up with a really big fight for those intermediates throughout the tour. We got this lovely side-on shot of the intermediate, and just take a look at how calm Cam Scott is following his teammate Kurt Ether. He's just chilling, he's looking around. He ends up letting Kurt take maximum bonus points or bonus seconds, and he just looked so relaxed coming into this one. We knew he was going to feature prominently in the finish with Kurt Ether. We had almost the exact same formula coming into the sprint. If it's not broken, don't fix it. Kurt Ether, he was leading out Cam Scott, but Ether was actually so quick in the lead out that Cam Scott couldn't come around. Kurt Ether takes the win. Craig Wiggins there, he looked really good here. He took 3rd across the line, hoping we can see a bit more from Wiggo over the next couple of weeks. So Cage, they take 1st and 2nd on GC into the Stage 2 Cronulla criterium. This circuit, it's 1.25 Ks. They've got a dip down after the start-finish line around this peanut-shaped section before doing a U-turn in the last 300 metres, where they have to sprint out of that corner and then launch pretty much straight away into the uphill drag to the finish line. Again, lots of attacking before we saw Brendan Davids get up the road. He sat steady at about 20 seconds or so for quite a while, and in these situations at first, everyone usually just goes, oh yeah, it's only a matter of time before he gets reeled in. But Brendan Davids, he was really moving throughout this back section of the course, and he had a few people sweating as the laps counted down. And check out here how stable he looks in his aero position. He's got his deep back wheel on, he's got shoe covers on. The man meant business coming into the stage, and he only ended up getting reeled in with 2 laps to go. So he was really starting to test the Cage riders who were setting up for another big bunch sprint. And as we came into that final sprint, they come out of the U-turn here. You've got John Carter in the front. He's in the under-23 leaders jersey. Kurt Ether sitting behind him, and then Cam Scott. Tristan Saunders here in the orange for Team Brennan was getting involved, and he's a pretty quick sprinter. But the person I want you to watch is Jack Ward in the green league leaders jersey. He follows Saunders at first, then he goes left as they split Carter, holds steady in the flat section, and then as soon as they hit that uphill drag, he just shoots up the right-hand side, which is actually the long way around. Very nearly took this one out, so super impressive from a guy who really cannot weigh much more than 60 kilos, I reckon. Cam Scott, though, he held steady, just took a narrow win ahead of Jack Ward, and so he goes into Stage 3 as the GC leader. And Stage 3, this is where it all went down. 72 laps of the Pheasantwood circuit, and yes, you heard that correctly, 72 laps. We had a breakaway of 5 to get up the road, and then we actually saw a lot of crashing behind in the main field. The riders, they kept trying to put pressure on the bunch through these sort of flowing fast corners. They came unstuck a couple of times. Poor Tynan Shannon here, he actually crashed twice in about 5 minutes, which wasn't ideal. And this was just one of many crashes throughout the day. The break kept ticking away, and then we actually saw Zac Marriage hit the deck. Because of the nature of this circuit as well, the riders, they get a lap out when they have a crash, so you won't see too much panic. After they touch down, they generally just assess themselves and get ready to jump on the bunch the next time around. The break, they kept rolling, and we started to see riders pop across from the main field, eventually creating a group of about 20 out front. Crucially, this was missing Jack Ward and Zac Marriage. What happened was every time one of these guys attacked on the uphill, the other one would mark the move and they would sit up. So Jack Ward might attack, Zac would follow, they'd look at each other, sit up, come back to the bunch. And what that did was allowed someone to attack over the top of them. And then those were the riders who ended up crossing over to the breakaway, while Jack and Zac basically just neutralized themselves out of that front group. The gap to the breakaway really blew out as well in these final 10 laps. And they didn't want the bunch, the comment says they didn't want the bunch to impede the breakaway because they were going to contest the win and obviously take all of the top spots and pretty much all of the GC because they were so far up the road. And so they ended up pulling that main field out. It was about 30 riders. It included Jack Ward and Zac Marriage, as well as second on GC, Kurt Ether. So they actually took out all of these riders from the race and then bang, just like that, you're out of the race. You'll get an estimated time and that's going to be minutes down. So immediately they were all out of the GC. their points for the league overall just vanish. So they only have sort of either sprint classification points or stage win or stage placing points. No GC points on offer for those guys. They're just out, which is actually crazy to see for two guys of that caliber, just to see them mark each other so heavily that they take each other out of the chance. They remove the chance of getting across to that front group and take themselves out of the GC completely. It was pretty wild to watch. The finish here as well, it was pretty exciting. So Cam Scott, he's in the front group. He's the heavy favorite coming into this final sprint. Connor Doyle, though, he decided, stuff waiting, let's have a crack, try a last lap flyer. He attacked through the first couple of corners throughout the lap. He didn't pull out a big gap, but he kept a lot of pressure on the pedals. He kept pressing on, which is crucial here. And they sort of had a bit of a half-baked chase behind. You had Ollie Jurovic here on the front. He's one of those guys who you would expect to potentially challenge Cam Scott. He's burning energy, closing it down, while Cam Scott sits tightly behind. Ollie Jurovic, he's not going to be fully committed to closing that gap down. He's going to wait for a teammate to come up, and that favors Doyle. He can pull the gap out a little bit more around that back section of the course. They come down into this final corner. Doyle, he's got a small gap, but take a look here at the positions coming into the sprint. You've got Brendan Davids. He's leading out for Tristan Saunders. But Saunders, he's way back here in roughly sixth wheel, and he's pushing through the wind. While Cam Scott, he's sitting second wheel, looking around to make sure that no one catches him by surprise. He's looking really good at this point. Just as we touch that final drag to the line, it's about 100, 150 meters or so. Cam Scott, he launches into clean air and starts bringing back Doyle. Saunders, who's already been sprinting for a good 5 seconds, he's coming up rapidly and started closing down on Cam Scott, but he ran out of legs. Cam Scott, he took a well-earned stage here and also secured the GC win with this sprint. I want to know from you as well. Let me know down in the comments. Do you reckon Tristan Saunders had the legs to challenge Cam Scott if he'd started his sprint slightly better position? He looked like he was closing pretty fast at the end there. Your GC podium at the end, Cam Scott, he sits ahead of Tristan Saunders, and it was actually Ollie Penny, local rider from Sydney, really strong guy. He stepped up into third place. He was in that original break of 5, picked up enough bonus seconds, and he'd been around the mark on the previous stages. Gets himself a GC podium in a ProVelo Super League race. Very impressive from him. And as we head into Grafton to Inverell this weekend for round 5, Cam Scott, he's looking really good. Jack Ward isn't going to be here. This opens the door up for both Cam Scott and Zac Marriage to close down his lead in the league overall. I'll have a race analysis of that one early next week, hopefully. Until then, catch you next time.